Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Alrighty, how's everybody doing in this nice COVID stay-at-home environment that we're all having? Everybody doing well, I hope? Yes? Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. We're going to be doing our normal Lightroom workshop that I usually have it in the studio. We're doing it here. So it basically makes it a little bit more awkward for you to kind of like interact, but hopefully you'll get something out of this. So I try to configure it a little bit differently than last time. So put up with me. I'm learning as I go along, just like you guys are. So anyhow, tonight's Lightroom. So I have quite a few things going on tonight that I'm going to wrap everything in together, including a type of a workflow for editing, as well as show you some various examples of editing on different types of images, all through Lightroom. And so hopefully you'll get something out of it. Like I normally say, the Monday nights is workshop night. The first Monday of the month is typically Lightroom. That's tonight. The next Monday is going to be Photoshop. And then the third Monday of the month is typically just a Q&A where you can basically ask any questions that, regarding photography, whether it's about your camera, about lighting, about editing, whatever it is. Hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions and we all get to learn a little something along the way. Just to keep you in mind, once this COVID stuff goes away and we're able to get out and socialize a little bit, obviously there's still going to be some kind of social distancing going on, just, to make sure that, we don't let this thing blaze up again. So I don't think it's ever going to go back to being normal the way we're used to it. But that doesn't mean that once things are a little bit under control, that we can't get back to having, live face-to-face workshops, especially if we're outdoors where we can gain a little bit of distance. A couple of things that I am planning once the quarantine is over is my annual multiplicity. I'm looking at a couple of different locations throughout Connecticut that we can come together and we'll work in small groups of 2 to come up with some interesting photos where we kind of place ourselves into the scene multiple times. It's always a favorite workshop in the past, and I'm hoping to replicate it again this year, even with all this craziness going on. Also, I have planned, I've done it 2 or 3 years ago, which was a photo hunt. I have a deck of cards with challenges on them, and everybody picks a card and you have 10 minutes to complete the challenge. Then we get back together, show off the images we got, laugh at what we've accomplished, share notes and things like that, and we get to do it all over again. Also, a combination of street and architectural photography. I'm looking at the Hartford area for this. It's been requested by the Hartford County Amateur Photographers group on Facebook. So we'll probably be just doing something up there. And of course, I want to do a couple of lighting workshops, small strobe lighting, kind of like off-camera flash, but using strobe lights in an outdoor setting, and maybe even something here in the studio where we do studio lighting. So when that happens, I don't know. Obviously, it's all dependent on all this craziness going on, All right. So anyhow, I'm starting to put stuff on YouTube. Like I said, I'm kind of learning this system as I go along, And in the past, I've had some audio issues. I recently thought I was doing really well. I had it under control, and I had camera issues, and I ended up losing about 1/3 of the end of the video, which kind of sucks because, you know, that was a good episode. But anyhow, I'm recording this. Hopefully, if things go well and nothing screws up, I'll be posting it on YouTube, so you can always refer back. Okay. I do ask that if you subscribe to my channel, if you like the videos, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button. That way you'll be notified when new videos go up. All right. So anyhow, that's it for the little news. Does anybody have anything that they want to share? What's going on in their lives? Anything?
I'll be honest with you, I find this easier than going to your studio, only because where I live in Cheshire, I have to take 42 and the back roads to get to 8 and then get down to Shelton, which is a little hard for me, especially at nighttime when it's dark, because my eyesight's not that good at night. So the time I came down the back roads, which is the quickest. But on the way home, I took 8 to 84 in Waterbury and came home that way. So this is easier for me, believe it or not.
Yeah, but I love this platform. It's great because I can get myself out to people in the further corners of, the area, like yourself. A lot of the people up in the Hartford area, a lot of people over in the New London, New Britain area. But, there are trade-offs. One of the things about the live workshops is that you can bring your laptop down with you, and we can share files, and you get to follow along. And Brian's here. He can attest to that. He's a regular, and we tend to learn a lot by doing that interactive, editing along with whatever I'm producing. If you're able to follow along and actually do it hands-on, whenever you come into a problem, you can say, oh, hey, I got a problem. How do you overcome this? Whereas with video, unless you have multiple computers in your house, you're kind of stuck using your computer for watching the video and hopefully being able to follow along later on. So it's not like you can follow what I'm going to be teaching along at this exact time. So there's trade-offs, but I'm glad you appreciate the videos. So anyhow, tonight's workshop is on Lightroom, and in particular, I want to explain a little bit about editing workflow. I have a bunch of images that I'm going to edit, and to be honest, what I did is something that I suggest you guys do every so often. Now, my library goes back to, 2006 or something like that. Obviously, the first few years with the digital camera for me was definitely a learning experience. Coming from film to digital, I had to kind of relearn the system because digital and film, just there's a lot of the basics the fundamentals that are the same, but there's also a lot of fundamentals that kind of get flipped on its head that I had to relearn. So my first, couple years with my camera, digital camera, were pathetic to say the least. But what I've done for tonight's class is I've actually gone back a couple of years and dug up an old folder of photos that I thought I would attempt at re-editing, especially now that my editing skills have improved. And it's something that I suggest you guys do every once in a while. Just, go back, find those, images that really, really spoke to you, 4, 5, 6 years ago, reopen them, and then, give it a try at re-editing based on what you know now. You'd be surprised, how looking back, you're going to go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And so what was I thinking? But we all learn, we all grow, we all, advance and we shift in our way of looking at our images. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to go back through some of my old images and I'm going to re-edit them. And hopefully along the way, you'll pick up some tips and tricks and things like that. So let's go over to Lightroom. And this is actually from 2013. All right, so this is going back quite a few years. All right, and this was with, let's see, what was my camera? Oh, this was my 6D. I think this was like the first year or second year I had my 6D, my Canon 6D, which is a full frame camera. So prior to that, I had a Canon 40D, which was pretty good, but a little lacking in low light capabilities. So this was at Cape Ann. This was a field trip that we took with Shutterbuds. All right. I think, Bill, did you go on this one with us?
I have to mute. Not that one, no.
No? Okay. This was a great, Sue Fenton put this together and it was a fantastic time. But anyhow, what I've done, all right, and then because we're kind of jumping into a little bit of midway through my normal workflow, is the typical workflow is I'll download all the images from the shoot and then I'll cull through, all right, because this is already been imported and culled through and has even been edited back in 2013. I've already gone through that part of the workflow. All right, so we're not going to worry about the import workflow. We're just going to worry a little bit more on the develop workflow or the editing workflow. All right, so I have here 25 images, all right, out of 34. And the reason, let me just bring this over here. All right, so if you look here down at the bottom, it says 25 of 34 images. The reason being is that I have a few images that were merged into HDR. So it's only counting the one HDR because they're grouped into groups. So, but anyhow, most of these I've reset back to standard. So if we go over to the develop module, see that everything's pretty much right down the center. Over on the right hand side, everything's down the center. That means everything, there are no effects applied to the image. Okay, and I have a variety of images. All right, this one here I did not reset. But the others are pretty much reset. So you can see I have a variety of images, different styles, some landscapes, some architecture, some detail shots, all right, and of course some images that I shot for HDR. So normal, underexposed, and overexposed. Okay, so there's a wide variety of stuff that we can play with. All right. So the first one, it's not the greatest image. Okay, but we found a seagull in the back of this pickup truck. I was just going to town on a bunch of french fries that it found. and it did not care that we were there. I mean, you can see I was at the back of the tailgate of the pickup truck, and it let me take a picture of it. It could care less than fly away. It was just having a ball. All right, so we have a few things that we need to cover. All right. Now, one of the things that I like to point out with any kind of editing, whatever it is, whether it's yes.
You're stuck on it. Oh yeah, you were stuck on an interior one. Okay.
Yeah. Hopefully we won't get too many hiccups. I try to reset my system to avoid some of the technical issues we had last time. So, but I appreciate the looking out. All right. Yeah. If at any time it hangs up, just let me know, guys. Okay. All right. So. Anytime you're editing an image, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what is the subject? What is it that I want the viewer to focus in on? Okay, and in this particular case, it's the seagull with the French fry in its mouth. Okay, so the next thing is to ask is, how prevalent is that subject? How easy is it to determine what the subject is? Well, in this case, I was able to eliminate a lot of the surrounding clutter by zooming in a little bit closer to the bird, kind of filling the frame with the bird. Again, it's not the greatest image. This was just kind of one of those grab shots of opportunity. You know, I said, let me see how close I can get to the bird before it flies off. So I was more concerned about getting close than getting a good photo, which is not a good excuse, but that's just where my frame of mind was back in 2013. All right. Had I given it a little bit more thought, I probably could have framed this a little bit better. But neither here nor there. These are the kind of things that we all run across. All right, so the first thing we notice is that we have a lot of brightness on the bird where it's being lit by the side light of the sun. This was early morning. And the top part of that pile of trash, which is a bunch of white plastic bags, is also being lit. So we have a little bit of competition between this plastic on the bottom, at the feet of the bird, and all this white in the feathers here. All right. Come on. All right. So I would like to knock down some of this brightness in order to bring our view back up towards the bird. Okay. And there's a couple of things that we can do. There's as with most editing tools, there are multiple ways of doing this. All right. So I'm going to show you one particular way that I normally handle. And then in another image, I'll show you a different way. All right. In this case, it's by using a graduated filter. And that's over on our right-hand side, just underneath the histogram. This one that's kind of like rectangular shape. Go ahead and click on that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drag from the bottom up. All right. And you can see there are 3 lines. Okay. There's a middle line that has this little kind of like round circle on it. All right. That's called a pin. That is the control pin. You can take this and you can drag it around anywhere in your scene. Coming off that middle pin is a line. And if you go off and follow that line, you'll see that it turns into a double-headed arrow. Right? That allows you to rotate the angle of that graduated filter. All right. In this case, I wanted a little bit of an angle because it kind of follows the natural angle of the trash underneath the bird. Okay. And then from there, we have two lines on the outside, one at the top and one at the bottom. And this controls our spread. And the way it works is that this pin is going to apply an effect. We haven't picked the effect yet, so don't worry about that, but it's going to apply the effect. And at the bottom line, it's going to apply 100% of that effect. By the time it gets to the middle line, it's only 50% of the effect. And then when it gets to the top line, that's 0% of the effect. All right, so that creates a gradient. All right. Now, one way to see this gradient is to be able to see the overlay. And if we look down just below the image in the toolbar, and if you don't see the toolbar, just hit the letter T. You'll say Show Selected Mask Overlay. If you click on that, you'll see the screen kind of turn to this reddish color. This lets you see that down at the bottom it's 100%, and you can see the gradation, and it gets to 0%. So that's a good way of being able to visualize where your effect is going. A shortcut for this is the letter O. All right, just hit the letter O on your keyboard and it'll turn it on and off. It'll toggle it back and forth. Okay. So I'm going to place this just underneath. And if we go over to the right hand side, all right, where it says effect, you're going to see that it's already picked an effect for me, all right, which is the -2 EV burn. All right, now this particular effect is one that I created. All right, there are two presets. I have so basically it's a one stop underexposure and a two stop underexposure. So that's what it means. And all it is the exposure slider is brought down 2 stops. Okay, so you can see it right here. Exposure, all right, -2. All right, but what I want to do is I want to knock some of that brightness down. So on top of that, I'm going to bring my highlights down. Okay,
Doug,
yes.
Doug, how were you able to get to the preset in order to get the -2, -2 stops?
Okay, where it says effect right here.
I don't see where it says effect. I'm sorry.
Yep, where it says
I don't
effect.
see it.
All right, you have to be.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to
I'm
be in the
having
graduate.
trouble.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm having trouble on the computer. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all right.
Oh, okay.
All right. So right next to effect, there's a little double-headed arrow. All right. If you click on that, it'll bring up all your presets. All right. These are all your developed presets. Okay. Now, the first section, temp, tint, exposure, contrast, all of those are presets that come with Photoshop or Lightroom. Okay, everything below that are presets that you can make. All right, there's a couple there that come with Lightroom, but you can create your own presets. So what I did is I created one preset. It was just I brought the exposure down -2. All right, and I saved it. All right, so what I did is I said exposure -2. All right, -2, and then I clicked here all the way down at the bottom, save current settings as new preset. All right, so when you click on that, it asks you to give it a name. And my thing with any preset that you make is you want to give it a name that explains exactly what that preset does. All right. In my case, it was a -2 exposure value. All right. So -2 EV, and it was a burn. So anytime you're underexposing, you're burning your image. Every time you're overexposing, you're dodging. Okay. So I call it -2 EV burn. Okay. And then just as a better explanation, I put darken in parentheses. All right. And I did that just because I teach, so I want people to understand what that effect does. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, awesome. All right. Now, even though, so presets are great because it gets you to a task that you do repetitively, gets you to that task very quickly within, a click or two. All right. But like all presets, you can enhance them. All right. And in this case, like I said, I want to knock down that very, very bright highlight, that specular highlight on the top part. I want to bring that down even more. So I'm going to take my highlight. All right. Let's see, maybe the highlight, or is it the whites? Yeah, no, it's the highlights. I want to bring my highlights down, and I want to knock down that even more. Okay, I'm actually going -100%. Okay, so now all of a sudden, okay, if we turn this off, let me scroll down just a little bit here. There's a little tab right here. That little toggle toggles the effects on and off. All right, so I'm going to toggle the effect off. You can see how bright it is underneath the bird. And if I toggle it back on, you can see now how much darker that section is underneath the bird. Okay, and then I go ahead and click on done. I click the done, or I can just hit the return key. All right, and it locks that effect in. So now just that one effect of adding shadow on the lower part of the image brings that bird closer to the forefront. Okay. Now the other thing that I'm a big fan of, that I like in my work, is adding a little bit of a vignette. The vignette, all it is basically corner burn. We're burning the corners of the image in order to bring the viewer's eye towards the center part of the screen, or the center part of the image. Okay. For that, I have presets all the way on the left-hand side. Okay. So right underneath the navigator, there's a tab called Presets. Lightroom comes with a bunch of pre-built presets, but like everything else in Lightroom, you can make your own. And I've made my own that I use all the time. And I have a section, a folder called Vignette. And you can see that these are all presets that I built for adding vignette. And if I hover over one of these presets, it's going to give me a preview of what that effect looks like directly on my image. So if you can see, every time I hover over one, I'm going to see what that effect does. All right. So in this case, I want to add just a little bit of darkening into the corners, right? Not much. So it's either going to be dark vignette +20 or +30. So all that's telling me is that it's adding a dark vignette. It's burning the corner. And then the +20, +30, +40, that's how strong that effect is. All right. So +20 is just barely there. +30, I think +30 does it for me. So I'm going to click on that. And you notice that the corners have darkened up, bringing the view of onto the bird a little bit better. Okay. Now, like I said, this image isn't the greatest. So I'm not expecting this to be, you know, some award-winning image. But even with a garbage image, you can see how just a couple little tweaks, you know, makes it a lot better. Okay. Now, the other thing that I'm not liking is this tire here. All right. This also is reflecting a lot of light back that I wouldn't mind toning down. Okay. And for this, because it's an odd shape, it's kind of like a letter C. All right. I can't really use a gradient because the gradient would affect everything around it as well. All right. And I don't want to really affect it. So for that, I'm going to use a local adjustment with the adjustment brush. All right. And it's this last icon just underneath the histogram on the right hand side. All right. So we're going to click on that. And that brings us to our brush adjustment. Okay. Now, if we look at the brush adjustment, you're going to see
it's frozen again.
Is it frozen?
We're back with you hovering over the preset on the left.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Let me double check my settings here. See if I can change streaming. Okay. All right. Yeah, it looks like on my end, looks like I'm doing good. So it might be something with Google Meet. Is everybody else seeing a locked screen, a hung up screen?
Yes, I'm staring at a bird.
Okay.
Me too.
All right. So you don't see my cursor moving between the bird and the tire?
Oh, now I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yes.
Now I do.
Okay. Awesome. All right.
Good.
Okay. All right. So that cursor represents the brush, and it's got 3 circles. The center circle is the pin. Okay. So just as you, let's see. All right. I don't know if that magnification does anything. The center circle is the pin. The first circle from that is the feather, and then the outer circle is the size of your brush. All right. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to size the brush, you know, whatever size you need, and then you're able to gauge how much feathering you have to the edges. Okay. So in this case, what we want to do is we want a fairly large brush with a soft feather. So if we scroll down to the bottom of our panel here, all right, we're going to see our brush effects. All right. And we have 2 brushes, A and B brush, and then a third brush, which is called the erase brush. Okay. This allows us to have 2 different sizes. All right. So my A brush, you can see that it's fairly large. My B brush is fairly small. And then I have an erase brush, which allows me to erase any effects that I have. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go with my A brush, and you can use, if you're familiar with the shortcuts in Photoshop, they're the same ones here in Lightroom. If you use your square brackets, left and right square brackets, you can make that brush smaller or larger. Okay, and if you use the shift bracket with this bracket, it allows you to control how much feathering. You can make your feathering feathering softer and wider. Okay, so I'm going to go with a good sized brush. All right, I basically want to make sure that I can cover a good portion of this tire. All right, so I've sized my brush accordingly, and I'm still on my -2 EV burn. Okay, because what I want to do is I want to burn this bright area down. So I'm just going to brush on it. All right, and you can see that as I brush, it's taking and knocking down that brightness of that tire down. Okay. Again, if I toggle on and off, you can see how that brightness has knocked down. And now all of a sudden, our eye isn't drawn towards that tire. It's being brought back towards the bird. So it's these little dodges and burns that really make a big difference in an image. Okay. And I would like you to consider using this technique in order to kind of like control where your viewer's eye is going to go. Okay. All right. Any questions with this? It was very simple, just to kind of give you an introduction of dodging and burning. In this case, we're just doing burning. Okay. And we did burning using a graduated filter and burning with a adjustment brush. We good?
I have a question about technique.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I use, I lower the exposure or raise the exposure, but more often than that, I usually use shadow or highlights. Which is better to do in a case like this?
With the adjustments or with the overall image?
Both. I've used in a case like this either with Lightroom or with Adobe Camera Raw. Sometimes I use the exposure slider,
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes I'll use the highlight only, or I'll use the shadow only, or when I'm in Photoshop, I will use the shadow or the highlight. But which is better, do you think?
Okay.
When I want to make things lighter or darker, using shadow and highlights or using the exposure slider?
Okay, so it's actually kind of a little bit of a loaded question, because I could take the easy way out and says, well, it depends on your image. But the truth of the matter is, it really does depend on your image. So if we look at the histogram up in the corner, all right, you can see that as the cursor travels across, it highlights different sections. All right. And if you notice right below it, every time I go over a section, it's going to read right where it says ISO 800 here. All right. When I hover over the histogram, it changes. Notice how it says blacks.
Yes.
Okay. And I move over one, it says shadows. And I move over one, it says exposure. All right. And then it goes highlights and whites. These are the 5 sections that each one of these sliders controls. All right. So we have your exposure. All right. And if you notice, when I hover over the slider here in the histogram, that section's going to get highlighted. So there's exposure, there's highlights, there's shadows, there's whites,
Okay.
and there's blacks. All right. So each one of those sections targets a very specific group of pixels. All right. Based on the luminosity of the pixels. All right. So right now in this image, you might consider this a high contrast image where we have, a lot of really bright brights on the bird and a lot of deep shadows in the bed of the truck. Okay, so depending on what effect you're looking for, you're going to target the section of the image that you want to manipulate. And there are two areas you can target those areas in. You can target it globally, meaning that when you move the slider, it's going to affect, for example, the shadows. It's going to affect the shadows on every single part of the image. Okay? Or you can do it locally, like I did, by using a local adjustment tool, such as a gradient filter or a brush, where I'm only targeting a very specific part of the image. Okay? So, for example, when I tackled the brightness underneath the bird, I went to my default -2 EV exposure. All right, so that graduated filter automatically shifted my exposure, which is the middle part of the histogram. It shifted that towards the dark side by 2 EV points. Okay, but because the plastic bag was very, very bright, it was outside of the scope of what the exposure was able to adjust. Okay, so it really didn't target that highlight. All right, so I then had to tackle that highlight separately by using my highlight slider. All right, with the graduated filter. All right, so let's go back to my graduated filter. Okay. All right, here's my graduated filter. I'm going to reset it. Okay, so that's with no effect. Okay, so the first thing I did was I went -2 on my exposure. Okay, and that darkened all my midtones. All right, because my exposure targets that center part of the image. All right, this is the midtones. Okay, so I brought my midtones down, 2 EV points. All right, but it didn't touch that very, very bright section, because on the histogram, that is way over here. That's probably, somewhere in this little lump on my histogram. Okay, I don't know if you can see it right here.
I can see, yeah.
Okay, so that's outside of what my exposure slider handled. All right, so because I want to bring that down, I took my highlights and I brought that down, and I'm watching it on the screen, and I can see how by dragging all the way till it maxes out, it knocked down that highlight, closer to what I was looking for. Okay, so it is dependent on your image. Okay, now let me delete that. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to do it globally. Okay, if I bring my, if I bring my exposure down -2, what's -2? Okay, you can see that it affected everything, including the bird, which is not what I wanted. All right, I wanted to target this section down below. Okay, so this tool is a little bit too much like a sledgehammer when I need, a jeweler's hammer. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, now I could say, well, this part here is outside of my exposure range. I don't mind it here. All right, let me just bring the highlights down. Okay, but again, it's targeting the bird along with that bag. All right, so this technique doesn't make any sense. All right, for what I wanted to do. All right, so I'm gonna just bring back my graduated filter. All right, do a -2 EV burn, and bring my highlights down. All right, and that solved my technique. Now, that being said, what you touched on is a slightly different way of editing an image. And let me give you an example with this image here. Again, not the greatest of images, okay? But I'm going to tackle this in a slightly different way, and hopefully this will answer your question. The first thing I want to do is I want to bring attention to this anchor. Now, one technique that I tell people is if you are looking at your image and you squint a little bit, all right, squinting kind of removes all the detail. All right, so when you squint, you kind of make everything fuzzy. All right, and what you're left with is areas of brightness and darkness. This allows you to evaluate your image. All right, so if I step back a little bit from my screen and I squint, I can see that there's an overall sameness to my value, except for a little section here. All right, and you know where this the shaft of the anchor is kind of going off the screen, and then there's this really bright spot of paint that hasn't quite weathered off, right? And then this part of the white here isn't as bad, but tonally, this area here and this area of the wood are very, very close, all right? Maybe about a stop and a half difference, all right? But this area here, where the light is hitting the shaft, this is the brightest section, okay? So overall, there's kind of an evenness, all right? And when you have a very even image, it becomes kind of boring, okay? So what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of contrast in a very specific way that focuses the viewer's eye to a specific spot. Now, what spot do I want? If I go here where this shaft is, all right, this shaft goes up to the right and off the image, okay? So it's a leading line, all right? We're following this line up and out of the image. I don't want that. I want to keep the viewer's eye in the center part of the image. So I want to make sure that I burn this section down a lot. I want to bring the attention to the center part of the anchor, okay? So that's my first decision, all right? So how I get there is dependent on what editing techniques I use. And this is where we're going to go into a slightly different technique than previously. So previously what we did is we used a graduated filter to remove brightness. In this case, I'm going to use a global effect to remove the brightness, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by lowering my exposure and lowering my highlights down a little bit, okay? And I am purposely underexposing my image, okay? And what I'm doing here is I am pre-visualizing the end results, okay? And the end result is going to be a brighter center part where the anchor is and darker edges, okay? So I'm burning down the entire image. I'm toning it down, okay, to the point where I feel it's dark enough for the edges. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a radial filter or a circular filter, okay, circular graduated filter. All right, I'm going to select that, and I'm going to click and drag outward from the center part where I want the view, okay? And I want to bring the exposure back up in that area, all right? Now, as I bring it up, you'll notice that it's lightening up the outside, okay? With the radial filters, you can apply the effect to the inside or the outside of the circle, okay? So right now it's applying it to the outside. If we look a little bit further down, there's a little checkbox that says invert. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it inverts it. All right. And then again, you have that center pin. You can grab it and you can drag it anywhere you want. Kind of like think of it like a spotlight that you can now take and move your scene to light where you want to light. All right. So I'm going to put it right here. So the majority of the anchor is lit. Okay. And voila. One simple little radial filter, and now all of a sudden our attention is brought exactly to where I want. So it took a image and made it a little bit better. Okay, again, it's not the strongest of images, but you can see how that little technique makes a big difference. All right, so that said, did that answer your question, Bill?
Got to get off mute. Yes.
Okay, so you can see what I mean by it depends on the image. All right, it really does depend on the image, but it also depends on what it is you're trying to convey with your editing. Okay, so in this case, I used a global effect to drop my exposure and a local effect to bring it up just where I needed the view. Okay, whereas the previous one, I kept the original exposure and then just dropped the exposure in very specific areas. Okay. All right, we can probably do the same thing here. All right, now, when I took this image, I had kind of two things in mind. I said, this can go really, really, really well as a black and white image, or it can go really, really, really well as an oversaturated image, meaning I really bring out the colors, okay? This was, let's see, let me flip back to my grid. This was in March of 2013. All right, so it was rather chilly, and this was early in the day, and it was kind of like overcast day. So the light is very, very even on these boats, and I try to get as high up as I could, kind of shooting down at the boats. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into workflow. Okay, when I approach an image, I approach it in a very specific order. Okay, the first thing I do is I want to normalize the image. Okay, and normalizing simply means getting it looking proper. All right, without any artistic edits. Okay, so that means correcting horizons, making sure that they're level, correcting any kind of exposure discrepancy. So if it's something a little bit overexposed or underexposed, I want to bring the exposure, to neutral. Okay, all right, and in this case, the one thing that kind of throws me is that it looks like it's too much of at an angle. So I'm going to go ahead and crop. Okay, the crop tool's right here. It's the first one on your toolbar. Okay, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of a straightening it out. Okay, and maybe even crop in a little bit more. All right. Okay, so that little bit of a crop and rotation makes it a little straighter in my eyes. Okay. Now, because I have two different edits in mind, the first thing I want to do is I want to make a copy. All right. Now, the way Lightroom works is any edits that I make are made virtually, meaning it's not affecting the actual file. All right. What it's doing is it's taking your raw file and it's creating a little recipe card, and it says, all right, all these changes I want you to apply to the image. Okay. So it keeps the recipe card separate from the image. Okay. In this case, what I want to do is I want to create a second recipe card. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the bottom on my film strip. I'm going to right click, and halfway down the menu, you're going to see where it says create a virtual copy. Create virtual copy. Okay. So what that's doing is it's creating a copy of your of not the image itself, but it's making a copy of your recipe card up to this point. So the copies that I've made now include that recropping, all right, the rotation, okay? And from here, I can edit both of these two different ways without worrying about ruining what I've done in one or the other, okay? All right, so I'm going to go back to my first one. And I'm going to make this one the color one, all right? And the first thing that comes to mind is I want to really, really saturate these colors, all right? So I want to bring up the colors, okay, and maybe even push the my vibrance up, all right? Vibrance. Okay, yeah. All right, now you can see those colors really, really pop. All right, so, okay. The other thing I want to do is I want to push the texture up. I want to really, texture is kind of like a contrast, but more on a, in the midtone section, okay? And a little bit of clarity, all right? Think of it like micro contrast. Texture is micro contrast of midtones. Is that micro contrast across the board, okay? It's not the contrast slider. This contrast slider works with the luminosity. The texture is more on a per pixel basis. All right. That's probably the best layman's description. It's a little bit more technical than that, but that's pretty much a layman's description. Okay. Now I push the okay. We're gonna push the contrast up. Okay, that makes those boats pop a little bit more. Okay, and bring my shadows down. Okay. And a little bit of whites. Okay, now here's a little tip. Oftentimes when we're editing, oh, Paula, all right. Hey, Paula, thanks for joining. All right, so as I was saying, one of the things when editing is because you're constantly looking at the screen, your eyes kind of get used to what it is that you are doing, all right? And our eyes tend to adjust very, very quickly to our edits. All right, so one of the things that I find is if you are adjusting any of these sliders, all right, let's say your exposure slider, and you move it up a couple of points, all right, your eyes get adjusted very, very quickly, all right, and then you start questioning yourself. Is that enough? Did it really do anything? And then you'll push it up a little bit. And you'll push it up a little bit. And you push it up a little bit more. All right? And every time you're doing, your eyes are getting adjusted very, very quickly. And then before long, you lose where that sweet spot is. Okay? So one technique that might work for you is if you're unsure, take that slider and really push all the way and bring back until it looks right to you. All right? And at that point, just kind of like leave it alone. Okay? Now you can see that in this case, where I stopped on my way back was 0.26 points above 0. Okay? So I actually added a little bit of brightness to the scene. Okay? But because I didn't add it gradually and gradually and gradually, and possibly losing what actually looks good to my eye, I went beyond it and brought it back. All right, so that's a good tip for you to when dealing with these sliders, and it goes for any of these. You know, whether you with the shadow, all right, go way back and then back it down. Go way past and back it down. All right, until it looks good to your eye. All right, so hopefully that tip works to your benefit. The other thing that I found, and there's a couple schools of thought on this depending on who you listen to on the internet, and I suggest you guys try either way and see which way works better for you. All right, but here's the problem. Okay, going back up to the histogram. Okay, the outside of the histogram is our blacks and our whites. Those are our two extreme ends. Okay? Two extreme ends. In from that, we have our darks, or our shadows rather, and our highlights. Okay? And in the center, we have our exposure. All right? So now, if we look at the darks and our whites, they're locked on either end. Meaning, in our whites, we can't go to the right any further than that, but we can go to the left. And vice versa with our blacks, we can't go to the left, but we can go to the right. So they're locked on the two ends. Our exposure, however, and like our shadows and highlights, they're not locked. They can go left and they can go right. And they will affect their adjacent neighbors. Okay? So there's two schools of thoughts. The first school is to set your black and your white point first before moving to your shadows, your highlights, and your exposure. All right, so think of it like an accordion or like a slinky, okay, where you can move one part of the end where you're holding it. You can move the inner part, but you can't move the outer part, okay? But if you grab the center and you move it, you're going to see that spring be affected all the way to each end, okay? So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is, well, Lightroom put these in a very specific order, going the exposure first, which is your middle, then your highlights, then your shadows, then the whites, and then the blacks. All right? So it's working the opposites, going from the center, the two middle parts, to the two outer parts. Okay? My thought is, if I adjust my center, anything I do left and right of that in my highlights and my shadows, it's going to affect that center part. And then the highlights and my shadows are going to affect my lights and darks. All right. So I'd rather work from the outside to the center, because once I lock my darks and my whites, my blacks and my whites, I'm locked. They can't go to the outside any further. Okay. But when I move those in to where I want to set my black point and my white point, it automatically affects the center. And I just have to shift my center parts just a little bit to fix the midtones. All right. So 2 schools of thought. I hope I explained that properly. Any questions on that? No?
I get that, because I've heard it both ways. I've heard work from the top down, but then I've also heard what you said, do your blacks and your whites first.
Right.
And I've also heard take it to the nth degree and then bring it back. And I've also heard working it from the center. I've done it all ways. It's like it's maybe sometimes it's the mood I'm in, or I look at the picture, I thought, yeah, maybe this is what this needs and whatever. But what confused me at one time, I asked on a forum, I keep hearing it different ways, go from top to bottom and then black and white. What should you do first? And somebody came up with a suggestion that said, look at the picture and see what really needs the work and concentrate on that.
Yes, that is a good point. But what I find is that part tends to require more local adjustments than global adjustments.
Okay.
Just from experience. So I tend to use this technique for all my global adjustments to kind of normalize my image and getting it kind of looking the way I want.
The other thing, 2 people, in fact, this was during a work session that Sue Fenton had in the fall. She said, or somebody said, that Lightroom, the newest version of Lightroom, is so good. A lot of times you could click auto and it will get you somewhat in the neighborhood as a benchmark.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the auto uses a lot of Adobe AI, Adobe Learning. So the predictive qualities are very, very good. And it's actually a good starting point if you're unsure. Okay, go ahead and click on the auto and then adjust from there. It's whatever's comfortable for you. All right.
What I have since found out is I find my judgment is best for outdoor pictures, and to start with, my judgment is best for outdoor pictures to do my way manually, and for indoor pictures I find auto to be better.
Right. Well, you have to understand auto anything, whether it's on your camera or whether it's in your editing tools. All right. It's kind of looking to put everything within a standardized exposure range, which is based on that, 50% middle gray. Okay. So again, depending on the type of image you got, sometimes it may overexpose your shadows too much, open them up too much for what you want. That seems to be the more common case. Or it'll flatten the image by adjusting the, opening up the shadows and dropping the highlights down so that they're a lot more even. All right. And often this can make the image look rather flat. So, again, the AI has been getting a lot better at being able to make some of these determinations, but ultimately it's going to be based on what your eye considers to be appropriate for that particular image. All right. Now, again, when it comes to artistic interpretation, you know, I can give this image of the boats to 10 different people, and all 10 people are going to edit it totally differently. All right. And all 10 people will be right because they're editing according to what they like. All right. And that's what I encourage you guys to do is edit to what looks right to you. Okay. Now I've said this in my workshops a lot. I have a color deficiency. All right. Where I have a hard time seeing those pale greens and pale reds. All right. There's a name for that color deficiency. I can never remember it. But I prefer images that have a little bit more contrast. I prefer images that have a little bit more saturation, simply because to my eye, which already is flawed, and I acknowledge that it's got a flaw, it looks better to my eyes. All right. Where somebody else may say, oh, wow, those colors are awfully bright, you know. But then again, I'm not editing it for your eyes. I'm editing it for my eyes. Okay. All right. So anyhow, let's go and finish this up a little bit. What I want to do is I want to darken this upper area of the water. So I'm going to go and click on a graduated filter. Okay. And I think placement here is going to be kind of critical. And what I want to do is I want to target, and make that water right in the upper corner here, the upper left and upper right corners. I want to just make sure that I darken that water down a little bit. Not so much that it looks like a black pool. All right. Okay. And maybe add a little vignette. See what that looks like. Oh, yes. There we go. Just a slight touch. Okay. Now, to me, I like that. Oh, what's this over here? There's something floating in the water. Let's get rid of that. Looks like a feather. All right. The second tool in from the top is our spot removal. Okay. Click on that. And again, you're going to see the 2 different concentric circles. All right. And again, you use the square brackets to make it, larger and smaller. And then the shift square bracket to control the feathering beyond that. So I'm going to have a nice medium range on the feathering. And I want to make sure that that inner circle covers that entire feather. I'm just going to tap once. And the AI does the rest, and the feather is gone. Just like that. Okay? All right, looking around, everything else looks pretty good. Okay, good. And my image is done. I'm pretty happy with it. And it didn't take all that much. Just boosted the saturation, boosted the vibrance, added some texture, dropped my shadows, opened up my whites, and added some contrast. Okay, and all contrast does is it takes the image from middle gray and pushes the lights and brights to the brighter side and the darks and shadows to the darker side. That's all it does. Okay. All right. Any questions about this image? No questions?
But I'm trying to recreate what you just did about getting rid of that little.
Oh, the feather?
And so, was there a plate? What I can't see where I'm setting the size.
Oh, okay. All right. So here's the spot tool. All right. As soon as you click it, right below it, you're going to see brush size, feather, and the opacity. I usually keep the opacity at 100%. I usually, very rarely find myself using, opacity where I'm actually seeing some of the originals still remain. Okay, but you can control the size with your square brackets on your keyboard. All right, so I'm just going to use the brackets. The right bracket makes it bigger. The left bracket makes it smaller. Okay, now if I press and hold the shift key and then hit the square brackets, it's going to make my feather, all right, harder or softer. Okay, so that's a great way of being able to adjust your brush on the fly. Square brackets. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you're doing this thing, to me it almost looks like the what's that Photoshop tool where you sample an area and then you cover over it. Because on mine, it looks like when I click on that, it's going off somewhere that I haven't controlled and is picking the area that it's going to heal with. Does that make sense? That I've lost control of doing that?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, well, in your case...
All right, okay, well, here, let me I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in right over here. I'm going to make this smaller. All right. There's two ways you can use this this tool. Okay. Let's say I want to get rid of that spot. All right. I'm going to size it to just a little bit larger than that spot. Now, if I tap once, just give it a little tap. Okay. It puts that circle, and then right next to it, you're going to see this other circle. All right. This circle that's a little bit bolder. I can take that. That's going to be my sample source. Right. I can move around here to patch here. All right. Does that make sense? Brian, does that make sense?
On your mic? That's what I missed. I'm sorry. I was missing that little...
Okay. Yeah. So here's the issue. All right. When you first click, Lightroom's going to make a best guess. All right. Again, using the AI, making a best guess from its surrounding as to what's going to best cover that spot. Okay. Most of the time, it does a really good job. Sometimes it fails miserably. All right. Sometimes, you see a little shadow something because it went somewhere on your image and you don't know why it picked from there. All right. But you'll notice that there's a little line with an arrow. All right. So you can always follow that arrow to its source. Okay. And then just grab that source and drag it around somewhere in the image that makes better sense. Okay. Now,
that's exactly what happened to me.
I'm sorry, what?
That's exactly what happened to me.
Okay. The other way you can use this, all right, let's say you have something that is irregular. Let's say I wanted to remove this part of the ore for some reason. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make my source a little bit larger. All right. And if I paint, okay, rather than just dab, I'm actually painting. All right, what it's going to do is it's going to create a marquee. Right? Use the AI, and of course, because I have a lot of feathering, you can see that my edges didn't quite cover everything. Okay, but just for illustrative purposes, you can have an irregular shape by actually painting that shape. Okay, and of course you can undo it. Okay, All right, so hopefully that answers your question there. Oh, actually, let me go back. I want to take that. I'm going to delete that. Bring my spot back.
It's frozen. It's frozen again.
Frozen? Okay, I zoomed back out to my 3 boats. All right, let's give this system. We're good?
Nope.
Still frozen?
Still frozen.
Ah. I gotta see if Zoom is any better. I might just have to bite the bullet and buy a subscription to Zoom. I like this because it's free. It allows me to, unlimited. Actually, it allows me up to 24 hours in a room here with up to 50 people. Okay, where Zoom the free version only allows up to, what is it, like 45 minutes?
40 minutes.
40 minutes with 50 people. So the free version is very limited. But I might have to just bite the bullet. And so, are we back? You see all 3 boats? See my cursor moving? Yes? No. Settings. Yeah, and I don't see anything on my output that.
Yeah, then I'm going to say Google hung you up. There we are. Now we see it.
Yeah, I got a funny feeling it might be Google. Let's see.
There's a 10-second lag when you threaten to go to Zoom before.
Yes, probably. It's Google's way of giving me the middle finger. Okay, so any other questions on this particular edit here with the saturated colors? No. Okay. All right. So the second copy. Oh, yeah. You can see here. Let me. We'll compare. All right. You can see the before and after very clearly here. Okay. So I don't know. I kind of like the saturated colors in the darker water. What about you guys? I think it makes it pop a little bit more.
Yeah, I always like things more saturated. Do a toggle again back to the old way. Just.
Let's see. All right, so there's the old.
Oh yeah.
There's the new.
Better.
There's the old. The old is kind of, when you compare it, it's kind of blah. And then with the colors, it just, it really pops. And because I toned down the background and brightened up the luminance, the luminosity on the boats, it makes them really pop off that water. Okay. So, again, very simple edits in and of themselves, but cumulative, it really, makes a big difference. Okay. All right. So now the second copy, like I said, I want to convert this to black and gray. Okay. And
I have a question before you move on.
Sure.
So you've just finished 3 different kinds of edits to this thing. You got the saturated, and you got rid of that little bird feather, and so you used 2 or 3 different tools on here.
Right.
So now that you've turned that off, how do you get back to can you get back to those tools now, or how do you, like you say, maybe decided you do really want that floating white piece in there for whatever reason?
Okay. Yeah, at any time I can go back to the tool that I want to undo. All right, so let's say I want that for some reason I want that little feather back. All right, I know I removed it with the spot removal tool, so I go back to my spot removal up in the corner here. Okay, and you can see as soon as I activate that, that little spot shows up as a little circle. Okay. Now in this case, it's only one circle because I only removed one thing. But if I had, cloned out a bunch of other things, this thing may be, filled with a bunch of spots. It's up to you to remember, what spot. Okay. So all you got to do is go back, select it. All right. And as soon as it's selected, you're going to see not only the spot, but it's the source that you're using to cover. All right. Once you see that double, all you got to do is hit the delete key and poof, it's gone. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Okay. So now let's go and clone that little feather out here on this one. There we go. Click on done. All right. This one I want to convert to black and gray. All right. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. Obviously, you can take our saturation and bring it all the way down and then play around with our shadows and our highlights and try to get this looking good. Okay. But that leaves a few options completely out of the game. All right, so let me reset that. Okay. Up here in on the basic panel, in the upper right hand corner, you're going to see by default it's color. All right, but right next to it, it says black and white. Okay. By clicking on that, it brings you, it converts everything to black and white. Okay. And allows you to still do all your exposure, highlights, shadows, and stuff. But if we go further down, we have a tab here that's called black and white. Okay. Now, let me go back, put that to color. Okay. And the color tab, when it's in color, that becomes your hue, saturation, and luminance tools.
Oh, I don't see the black and white tab.
All right. Okay. So here, hold on. Oops.
I think it's frozen again.
All right. We're in the develop module.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see.
All right. And the basic. All right. We're going to click on basic. All right. Just below where it says basic. All right. It says treatment, color, or black and white.
I know where it is now. Yeah.
Okay. So if by default it's on color. All right. And if we scroll down a little bit further, you see tone curve, and then you see HSL/color. All right. That stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. Okay. So that allows you to control the hue, the saturations, and the luminance of your color image. But when you switch from color to black and white here in the basic tab, as soon as you hit on black and white and we scroll down, that HSL has now changed to your black and white tools. All right. And this is a nice and powerful tool to use. Okay. And I'm going to click on that, and you can see that it opens up my CMY RGB color channels. Okay, so I have actually a little bit more. I have red, orange, yellow, green, aqua, blue, purple, and magenta. So all these color ranges are available for me to manipulate. All right, and you're probably saying, well, it's a black and white image, why am I modifying colors on this tab? Okay. Well, you have to understand the basic technology behind a color image. A color image is basically 3 black and white images with 3 different color filters applied to it. A red filter, a blue filter, and a green filter. But at its core, they are 3 black and white images. Okay? So what this does is the red pretty much just handles the red channel. All right, that black and gray image that is to the red channel, blue to the blue channel, yellow to the yellow channel. The other ones are a mix of multiple channels. So, for example, the yellow channel is, you know, your red and blue adjusted appropriately. Okay, the purple would be your blue and red channels mixed. All right, so this just becomes a slightly easier way of manipulating the underlying color behind your black and gray images. I don't know if I explained that properly. Okay.
Welcome.
Sorry, hit the wrong button. All right, so let's go back to the basic panel. Okay. If I go to my color, we have this kind of like teal color. All right, so teal is a combination of blue and green. All right, and we have 2 slightly different colors of blue and green, and then of course we have gray, and we have brown. Brown has a lot of oranges, yellows, and reds in it. Okay, so when we understand what actually makes a particular color, when we go over to our black and white, and we come down to our black and white mix, we can apply our changes to those very specific targeted color areas. All right, so for example, the pier I know is brown. Brown is a combination of orange, red, and yellow. All right, so I can take any of these oranges, yellows, and reds, all right, and see how anything that's found is affected. Okay, so what it's affecting, because they're black and gray, it's affecting the luminosity, how bright and how dark that part of the image is. Okay, so this allows us to very specifically target different parts of our image that are black and gray. Okay, all right, understanding that, let's go back to our basic, and we have 2 sliders here that a lot of people don't quite take into consideration when dealing with a black and white image, and that is color temperature and tint. All right, color temperature goes from yellow, warm, to blue, cool, where tint goes from red to green, or magenta to green. Okay, or I'm sorry, magenta to green, and then color temperature blue to yellow. Okay, now even though we are dealing with a black and gray image, black and white image, right, these sliders will affect globally the colors. All right, so if I cool my image, all right, in color, I'm shifting everything to the blue side. Okay, but in black and gray, it's creating a certain amount of contrast. Vice versa, if I go to warm side, okay, the color is being shifted to the warm tones, but you can see how it's affecting my black and white range. Right? You can't manipulate your luminosity with the temperature and the tint slider. Okay. Right. So you can see how shifting everything to the magenta side is creating a lot more contrast. And then shifting over to the extreme blue and extreme yellow are shifting contrast, but to the blue side, it's really doing something to this water. Notice how it's really brightening up. As I go over to the other side, it's not lightening up as much, but the boats are getting a little bit lighter. Okay, so these two sliders, a lot of people tend to overlook when dealing with black and white images, but they can be very, very powerful. All right. Also from here, like you would with a color image, you can adjust, excuse me, you can adjust the contrast within certain areas of your image. Okay. You can raise your whites. Okay. You can change your exposure. You can add more contrast, less contrast. Okay. And then once we're happy here, if we come to our black and white mix, we can additionally modify our image. All right, let me go to the aqua, into the blues. All right. Okay, now this is where it gets really, really tricky. All right, because you have to you have to keep the color version in your head. Okay. Now remember I said there's a lot of teal and aquas in these boats. All right. But if I move the aqua and teal, it's really affecting my image at all. Okay. But if I go back to my basic tab and I bring, all right, notice where my color temperatures are. Okay, if I go back to color, because I warmed it up so much, I warmed up that teal to the point where it's not registering. All right, so you have to understand what these sliders are doing, all right, in order to understand how the sliders in the basic tab and the sliders in the black and white tab affect each other. Okay. All right. So I know it's a little bit convoluted. I know it's a little bit difficult to wrap your head around, but what I suggest is leave the temperature and the tint alone and do that last. All right. So go to your hue saturation. You can, oh, no, sorry. Black and white. Go to your black and white tab, all right, and make adjustments. Now notice how my aqua and my blues are really affecting these areas, even the green. Okay. All right. Once you're happy with it here, then go back and see what these do. To create a little bit more drama in these images. Okay. Add black and white and to add a lot of texture to them by really pumping up my texture and clarity. The other slider that you can try using is, okay, dehaze tends to act more like a contrast, but in the highlights section, not so much the highlights and all All right. So that's a quick explanation of how to edit one particular image two different ways. One by really saturating your color, and the other one by converting it to black and gray and really punching up the contrast. All right, any questions on that part? Oh, I almost forgot. I like to add my little vignette. Oh, I think that's a little bit too much. Okay, so let's go back down to my effects, and let's go -10 instead. There we go. A little better. Okay, any questions on black and white editing?
No questions, but because I was having trouble seeing it, the selection, the areas on the right side of the computer, I opened up, while you were explaining this, I opened up my own version of Lightroom, and I played along while you were discussing it, and it came out kind of nice. I changed the temperature. Well, I did that last, but I went in, and this was of, it just happens to be that I chose this picture. It's a picture of a duck at Hubbard Park. So what I did is I lowered the green, in black and white, I lowered the green and yellow, up the orange a bit, and up the red a bit. And then what did I do up here? I moved the tint down, and I moved the temperature down.
Okay, and all those did what to your subject?
It punched it up. It changed the it sort of changed the brightness and the luminosity of the different areas. Instead of just being a flat black and white picture, it added more punch to it.
Cool. Awesome.
It was because it was already a processed color picture where I'd already played with contrast and other things. I didn't play with contrast or clarity or texture with this because I had already done that. If I had taken a raw photo, then I would have done that.
Okay, cool. All righty. Okay, it's about 10 minutes of any other questions anybody have on anything?
I have a question just to clarify, to summarize, a summary question on the black and white. So
Sure.
The steps were to open up the black and white, or open up the basic and turn it from a profile of color to monochrome, yes?
Yeah.
And then the second step was this is my question. Second step, play around with temperature and tint, or from there go down and play around with the black and white mix sliders first?
Yeah, I usually say go down to your black and white mix first.
Okay.
Because this allows you to target very specific areas of the image. Okay? And then experiment with the color temperature and the tint, all right, because you'll find that small changes in that area can really make a big difference. If you start with that, it can nullify some of what you do in the black and white section. All right, so I usually say save the color temperature area for last, all right, because it can drastically affect what you do in the black and white section. Okay, and then again, don't discount the dehaze slider with your black and whites. Okay, oftentimes with a color image, you'll never ever touch the dehaze, but with a black and white image, I suggest you try it. All right, because sometimes it really punches up that contrast nicely in a way that you never thought it would. Okay. Oh, the other thing you can do, which I didn't even touch on, is you can add grain. All right. You can add black and white images. Okay. That's another way of adding another layer of texture to your image. Obviously, you know, at 100%. Let's see. Is it visible? And there we go. Now we see it. Okay. But that's another way of adding a little bit of texture to your image. So I'm not a big fan. I usually don't touch it, but some people like it. Okay. Any other questions? Bonnie?
Doc?
Sure.
In the beginning of the presentation, you indicated that you had reset all your photos from prior adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do that all at once, or how did you reset all your photos if I wanted to go back to my 2013 photos?
Okay. All right. Let's just pick a random image here. Okay, let's say, I made all these changes to my image here. All right. You notice that all these sliders here on the right-hand side, they're all over the place. Okay. And, I hate when it does that.
You're frozen on my screen, so I'm not able to see.
All right. I'm all the way on the right-hand side in the basic tab. Okay. You'll notice that if we go down, exposure, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, these have all been shifted. They're changed. Okay. I've applied all kinds of edits to it. Okay. So like, for example, exposure, it's negative 0.62. Contrast is plus 26, highlights plus 47, and so on, right? Can you see that?
No. My screen is frozen, so so I can't see any of that.
That's frustrating. Yep, I think I'm gonna have to invest in Zoom. Sorry, Google. All right. Well, anyhow, from your in the develop section, okay, where you have all your develop tools, basic, tone curve, split toning, and all of it, all the way down on the bottom of that, you're going to see a button that says reset.
Okay.
Okay. You press that, it's going to reset everything to the default. Any edits that you applied are going to be gone.
Okay, great.
Okay. Another way of doing it is if you, for example, say, well, I like what I did in the lens correction section or the effects section, but I want to just rework the basic section. All right. What you can do is if you double tap where it says, the major headings there. All right. If you double tap on white balance, it'll bring it back to the default. Let me just make some changes here. If you double tap on where it says tone, it resets that whole section. If you double tap in where it says presence, it'll reset that section. All right, so you can have a little bit finer control if you want to reset one section without affecting others.
Okay.
All right,
so that I knew, but I just wanted to go through some photos that I'd like to redo as you did tonight.
Right, right. The other way you can do it is if you are in the grid view, all right, if you're in the grid view, what you can do is you can say, hey, I want to reset this one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay, so you can go ahead and select all your images. All right, and I don't recall. Yeah, I don't see a way of doing it here. But once you have multiple images selected If you go back to the develop module, all those images are going to still be selected, even though in the center you're only going to see one. All right. Now, on the bottom, all right, you're going to see right next to the reset button, you're going to see a button that says sync. All right. With the sync button, there's a little toggle. All right. If you turn it on, it changes it to auto sync. All right. If you turn it off, it says sync. All right. You want to toggle it on to auto sync and then hit the reset, and it will reset all your selected images.
Okay.
All right. So that's a good way of doing multiple images in one shot, you know, without affecting others. All right. But the auto sync has to be on, otherwise it won't work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Any other questions? Well, we lost a couple people, but for the most part, we had a good time. So hopefully everybody learned a little something about different techniques of editing an image. So you can edit an image by controlling very local areas, or by globally modifying it and then reapplying just locally, bring back the original just locally. Okay. And then of course, converting things to black and white and using contrasts to bring out the detail. Okay. Alrighty, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight.
Thank you.
Next week, Monday, same bat time, same bat channel, but we'll be working with with Photoshop, not Lightroom. Okay.
This was good. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Doug.
Bill, thanks for the great questions. Bonnie, it was a pleasure seeing you again. Brian, thanks for hanging out with me. And Paula.
Enjoyed it.
Awesome. It was great seeing you. Well, seeing you.
Or something.
Something like that. Yeah. But no, this is great because Paula is actually down in Mississippi. She's
way down here.
Yeah, she's one of a very talented photographer down in Mississippi. She hangs out in Fotomentores, the forum that I recommend everybody to join and participate with, because
I do too.
Yeah, because if
whereabouts in Mississippi? Because my brother lives in Mississippi.
We live out from Brandon, which is close to Jackson.
Okay, then you're north, because my brother lives in Ocean Springs, which is next to Biloxi. Are you near there? Okay, because I go to, I guess it's not going to happen this year, 3 years in a row, I went to Cruisin' the Coast, which is a giant car show that goes for 70 miles from, I think, Gulfport to...
Yeah. There's a lot of people disappointed that that's not going to happen this year.
That's not happening. Okay, yeah, that is a mega terrific car show.
Wow.
And Ocean Spring
probably won't happen. But
downtown Ocean Spring, there's one street downtown where it's not too dark and it's not too light. You have a good amount of overcast.
I know right which street you're talking about.
It's not the street where Tato Nut is on. It's on that other street,
right.
that cross
the one
street.
With the trees.
Yes, the one with the trees. I've taken a lot of pictures there because normally when you go to car shows, they're out in the hot sun and you got all this glare and they look horrible and you have a horrible background. Where that street there is with the trees is terrific.
Yeah. You get some nice dappled light on that street.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Look at that. Small world.
Yes. 2021. Okay.
Yeah. Well, if you want to continue your conversation, Bill, join Fotomentores.
Yep.
Share your images.
There's some car aficionados there.
Yeah.
Dave Chin does a great job with old cars.
How do I connect to Photo Mentores? Because I will post some pictures that I took there.
Yeah,
Photomentorist.com.
if you look right here on my screen, all right, you're gonna see the link rotate through. All right, it's a forum. It's basically Photo Mentores, which is the Latin word for mentor, all one word, photomentorist.com.
Okay. I will go there.
Yeah, check
Awesome.
it out.
Thanks, Paula.
But you have to interact. You can't just sign up and not interact.
Okay.
You know, it's a great way to learn. And Paula is probably one of the best to attest to the power of Photo Mentores. She's gotten her own one-woman show based on feedback that she got from members at Photo Mentores. Her work has grown exponentially because of feedback from members in Photo Mentores. And she's, you know, a glowing example of how putting a little bit of effort, you know, and taking the feedback and applying it really ups your game. So everybody's proud of her.
Good.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to that.
All righty,
So,
guys. Well,
Also,
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.